At the corner of room 214, tucked beside a bookshelf lined with outdated textbooks and plastic globes, sat a boy with a faraway gaze. Elijah Carter, 12 years old, slim as a pencil and twice as quiet, spent most of his days staring past the cracked classroom window into the sky. The pane had a spiderweb fracture on the lower left corner, a scar nobody fixed, much like Elijah. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. While Mrs. Patterson scribbled equations on the board with her back turned, Elijah wasn't watching the chalk. He was imagining atomic bonds splitting, merging, dancing. In his mind, electrons weren't invisible. They had weight, they had color, they had rhythm. To him, the classroom's dusty air shimmered with possibility. The humming of the fluorescent light above wasn't annoying. It mimicked vibration patterns he had read about in an old physics book from the thrift store. But Mrs. Patterson didn't see brilliance. She saw a blank face. She saw defiance. "Elijah," she snapped without turning around. "Are you with us or floating in Neverland again?" A few students snickered. Elijah blinked, slowly shifting his eyes to the board. "I was listening," he murmured. His voice was barely audible, not out of disrespect but instinct, learned silence. She didn't reply, but she circled his name with red marker on her attendance sheet. Disengaged. It wasn't the first time. At Crestwood Middle School, located in a gentrifying neighborhood of Atlanta, the black students walked tightropes. You had to be present, but not loud. Smart, but not intimidating. Curious, but not suspicious. Elijah, who didn't shout answers or giggle with classmates, became a target of a different kind. A silent kind. The teachers spoke about him during staff meetings. "Doesn't apply himself," one had said. "Always looking out the window. Maybe ADHD? We've tried encouraging him. He just doesn't care." What they didn't know was that Elijah spent his evenings studying topics far beyond his grade level. Quantum entanglement, frequency theory, energy fields. His bedroom was his real classroom. Its walls, adorned with taped pages from broken encyclopedias, served as the foundation for his experiments. His desk held not toys or video games, but copper wire, broken radios, scraps of metal, his tools. But here, in room 214, none of that mattered. The daily microaggressions were subtle, sharp, and cumulative. When white students doodled in their notebooks or whispered during lectures, it was typical behavior. When Elijah blinked too long at the sky, he was disrespectful. His answers were often dismissed with a dry "that's not what I asked." When he tried to clarify his thought process, Mrs. Patterson's eyes glazed over. Once, during a science quiz, he drew out a detailed explanation involving wave-particle duality. The teacher marked it incorrect. "You're supposed to choose A, B, C, or D," she said, handing back his paper with a red X. At home, however, Elijah was a different child. "Tell me what you saw in the sky today," his grandmother would ask each evening as she stirred collard greens on the stove. Miss Lottie was sharp-eyed and slow-moving, her legs stiff from years in the mill, but her spirit untarnished. Elijah smiled when he saw her. "I wasn't looking at the sky, Grandma. I was thinking about how electrons behave when they're not being watched. Like people." She raised an eyebrow. "Like people?" "Yeah," he said, tugging at the frayed edge of the kitchen tablecloth. "They act different when they're seen, but when nobody's watching, they can be anywhere, everywhere." Miss Lottie didn't understand the science, but she understood the heart behind it. She had seen the same thing in her husband, a gifted jazz musician who died working construction when gigs dried up. The world didn't know how to hold black genius unless it came wrapped in entertainment. She bent down, kissed the top of Elijah's head, and said, "Then you be everywhere, baby. You be bigger than any box they try to put you in." He tucked those words deep into his chest. Still, every morning when Elijah returned to school, the box awaited. On this particular Thursday, the sky outside was cobalt blue, streaked with long clouds. Elijah was watching how one cloud broke into three, then morphed back into one. He traced its shift with his eyes, lost in thought, calculating how light would scatter through its moisture. Mrs. Patterson's voice was droning on about multiplication factors. Then came the hush. A knock rattled the door. The classroom stilled. Principal Donovan entered. Tall, pale, and sharply dressed. He had the kind of voice that made children sit straighter. He was known for smiles in the hallway and icy glares in private. His eyes locked onto Elijah immediately. "Mr. Carter," he said, voice heavy, "step outside." Elijah froze. His classmates exchanged glances. He stood slowly, chair screeching behind him, and followed the principal out. But Donovan didn't wait until the door shut. Instead, he turned around in the doorway, voice booming into the stunned classroom. This is what happens when you ignore discipline. You waste your time. You waste my time. And frankly, you're a distraction to the students who actually want to learn. The class fell silent. A few students looked down. Others smirked. Elijah stood there, still as a statue, eyes wide. The humiliation hit like a wave, hot, thick, drowning. But before Donovan could continue, a voice crackled through his walkie-talkie. "Principal Donovan, you have a call on line 1. Dr. Elena Voss." He blinked, confused. "Who?" "From the Nobel Foundation. She says it's urgent. She's asking for an Elijah Carter." The hallway went silent. Elijah turned toward him slowly. And for the first time, the principal's confidence cracked. Principal Donovan stares at the boy he just humiliated, face pale, hand frozen as the world shifts beneath him. The hallway air was still, thick with the invisible tension of something that shouldn't have happened but did. Elijah stood there, small in frame but not in presence, trying to steady his breath as Principal Donovan's eyes darted to the walkie-talkie in disbelief. "Dr. Elena Voss, asking for him," Donovan repeated, voice low, tone clipped. The secretary's voice crackled again, confirming, "Yes. Line 1, sir." She was very clear. "Elijah Carter." A silence fell between them, more deafening than any reprimand. Donovan, polished in his dark navy suit and crisp tie, looked down at the boy he had just embarrassed. The lines around his mouth tightened. For a moment, he didn't know what to say, or perhaps didn't want to say it in front of the other students who were still whispering behind the cracked open classroom door. He stepped back and muttered, "Stay here." Elijah didn't move. Donovan disappeared into his office, and the door shut with a heavy thud. The moment it closed, a slow murmur of voices began buzzing from the classroom. Elijah couldn't hear the words clearly, but he could feel their weight. He had felt this before, not outright insults, but the sharp-edged whispers, the knowing glances, the assumption that if something big or smart or mysterious was happening, it must be a mistake, or worse, a lie. He looked down at his hands. He hadn't done anything wrong. He had just looked out the window. But here he was again, standing in a hallway that had become more familiar to him as a corridor of discipline than a place of learning. The classroom door creaked open slightly more. A student leaned forward, a girl named Violet with a shy demeanor and a messy ponytail. She wasn't one of the popular kids. Her parents were rarely seen at school events. She was the kind who blended into the background, unless you were like Elijah, and noticed those who didn't shout to be seen. Violet raised her phone discreetly. She had captured the entire incident, the public shaming, the names, the way Donovan's voice had risen, not with anger but with disdain. And now this Nobel scientist. She hit save on her video, but didn't say a word. Inside the principal's office, Donovan clutched the phone with both hands, pressing it tighter than necessary. His fingers were twitching, a subtle giveaway of a man scrambling for control. "Yes, this is Principal Donovan," he said, attempting to inject his usual confidence into his voice. "You asked for Elijah Carter?" Dr. Elena Voss's voice was calm, intelligent, and unmistakably authoritative. "Yes, I viewed a short science demonstration attributed to that name. It was passed to me through a former colleague. It was remarkably advanced. I wanted to confirm that the boy was indeed enrolled at your school." Donovan hesitated. His mind was racing. Was this some kind of prank? But no, the voice was too assured, the name too real. Elena Voss, Nobel laureate in quantum chemistry, featured on magazine covers, keynote speaker at global summits. He had seen her once in a news segment, talking about accelerating clean energy through synthetic molecules. And she was calling about that boy? Yes, he's a student here," Donovan finally said, eyes narrowing toward his office window, where he could just barely see Elijah's still figure standing in the hallway. "Although, he's had some behavioral issues, not always attentive in class, easily distracted." There was a pause on the other end. Then Voss replied, cold as frost. "I see. Well, I hope your school understands how to support brilliance when it's quietly sitting in your back row. I'd like to speak with the boy myself, perhaps arrange a meeting with his guardians. Please have them contact me. My office line is on the caller ID." The line went dead before Donovan could respond. He placed the receiver down gently, as if fearing it might shatter. Outside, Elijah hadn't moved. His face was calm, but inside the winds had shifted. Donovan opened the door, this time with far less performance. "Go back to class," he said, not meeting Elijah's eyes. Elijah stared at him, lips parting slightly, but no words came, not because he didn't have anything to say, but because he knew it wouldn't matter. He turned, shoulders square, and walked back into the classroom. This time, it was silent. Even Mrs. Patterson, usually quick to reassert authority, said nothing as Elijah took his seat. The others watched him like he was something else, now, some unpredictable force that had just revealed its glow. But Elijah didn't look at any of them. He kept his eyes low, his fingers resting on his desk. His mind wasn't on the class anymore. It was orbiting something entirely new: validation. Still, the wound hadn't closed. It had only been dulled by the surprise of the call, the sting of being humiliated in front of his peers, of having his character questioned, of being called a waste. That sting lingered. And Principal Donovan, he hadn't apologized, not even close. He walked into the class minutes later, trying to carry himself like nothing had happened, but he didn't speak. He stood near the back, observing. And when Elijah shifted in his seat, Donovan's eyes followed him closely. That night, Violet uploaded the video to a private group chat shared by a few classmates, one of whom, without saying a word, shared it again. Then someone else posted it anonymously on a student blog titled Crestwood Secrets. The post was simple: "Gifted black boy publicly humiliated." Then the Nobel Foundation called. By the time Elijah sat down for dinner, the video had been viewed 73 times. Quiet ripples, still beneath the surface. But ripples have a way of growing. At school the next day, Elijah walks into class and notices every student staring at him. One of them whispers, "He's the one from the video." The whisper never left Elijah's ears. "He's the one from the video." It trailed him down the halls like a ghost with a smirk. Teachers eyed him with new curiosity, but the undertone hadn't changed. The cautious distance remained. Suspicion coated every compliment like sweet tea masking vinegar. That night, when Elijah closed the creaky door to his bedroom, it was not to escape the world. It was to return home. His bedroom was nothing like the rest of the old house on Monroe Street. Where the wallpaper in the kitchen peeled from age and humidity, Elijah's walls were covered in taped diagrams, scratched notes, and crumpled formula sheets. Above his bed, a torn-out page from a physics journal was pinned next to a photograph, one that meant more to him than any certificate ever could. It was a picture of his father, Thomas Carter. In the photo, Thomas wore his faded gray janitor's uniform, a name tag crooked on his chest, a mop in one hand, and a physics book in the other. His eyes were tired, but his smile was pure pride. He had been cleaning university floors by night, but his mind had roamed the stars. Every shift break, every lonely hour past midnight, he read anything he could afford, steal from donation boxes, or fish from library discards. Elijah remembered the soft weight of his father's voice at bedtime. "Energy doesn't vanish, Eli. It just changes form. That's you. You're going to become something this world's never seen." But Thomas never got to become anything more than what he was allowed to be, a shadow with brilliance burning beneath his skin. He died when Elijah was 6. A scaffolding collapse, mislabeled equipment, and no lawsuit filed. Just a folded flag, a condolence card from the contractor, and silence. The world moved on, but Elijah never forgot. That's why his room became a lab, a sanctuary, a protest. In one corner, 2 broken microwaves formed the base of a makeshift particle chamber. Old VCR parts lay scattered like relics, each component memorized. Strings of LED lights blinked from a cracked power source. On his desk sat his prized possession, a 1990s-era digital microscope, gifted by a retired neighbor who saw the spark in his eyes. Every item had been salvaged: dumpster dives behind Goodwill, Craigslist freebies, neighbors' curbs. Miss Lottie once scolded him for dragging in a broken ceiling fan. "You can't fix everything the world throws out, baby," she had said, arms crossed. He had replied quietly, "Maybe not, but I can learn from it." Miss Lottie, his grandmother, was as fierce as she was wise. Her voice was gospel in the house. She had raised 3 boys through food stamps and graveyard shifts, and Elijah was the last legacy she was determined to see bloom. But her love came with armor. "You're not just smart, Elijah. You're black and smart. And don't you ever think those 2 words will earn the same respect." He remembered the sting in her voice that day, her hands shaking as she folded his laundry. "They'll smile at you while they clip your wings. And if you try to fly anyway, they'll call it an accident when they shoot you down." It wasn't fear she was passing on. It was history. Sometimes he hated how right she was. But tonight, her voice was softer as she tapped his door. "Dinner's cold," she said, "but I saved you some catfish and cornbread." "Thanks, Grandma," Elijah answered, eyes glued to a sketch he was refining. "You still working on that battery thing?" "Not a battery," he said. "I'm trying to simulate molecular rearrangement using electrical induction across salvaged metals. If I can control the field precisely, it might mimic ionic behavior on a small scale." Miss Lottie blinked. "So, it's a battery." He laughed under his breath. Sure, Grandma. A battery. She smiled faintly, then left him to his madness. Elijah turned back to the scraps in front of him. Pieces of copper tubing, foil, broken wire from a blender, and an LED node he had extracted from an old solar light. The idea had hit him like lightning after watching a nature documentary earlier that week, the way ants communicated using pheromones. It gave him a thought. Could he design a circuit that adjusted its conductivity based on tiny environmental changes? It wasn't supposed to work. Not really. But when he completed the final connection, something strange happened. The node pulsed. Once, then again. It flickered in a rhythm not dictated by his input. It was responding. Slight fluctuations in the room's temperature, in the moisture near the window. The junkyard creation wasn't just a circuit. It was acting like a synthetic molecule, a dumbed-down model of an adaptive structure. Elijah sat back in his chair, stunned. He hadn't expected it to react, but it had. Not randomly, with purpose. He rushed to scribble his observations. He adjusted the setup. The node pulsed faster. He cupped his breath over it. The humidity changed, and so did the signal. His hands trembled. He knew what this was. He had created a working model of molecular mimicry from trash. His father would have wept. He stared at the blinking node, chest rising slowly. The chaos outside his door, the stares, the whispers, the humiliation, all faded beneath the glow of that tiny light. In that moment, Elijah Carter wasn't just a boy who stared out windows. He was a scientist, a pioneer. As Elijah leans in to record the data, his phone buzzes. An unknown number flashes across the screen with a message. We saw what you built. Are you ready to be seen? The message on Elijah's phone glowed like a signal from a distant planet. We saw what you built. Are you ready to be seen? He stared at the words, his breath still fogging up the lens of the microscope beside him. It didn't have a name attached, just a string of numbers and a barely functioning Weblink. He clicked, cautiously. The browser led to a modest science forum, mostly for hobbyists and fringe thinkers, but the post at the top was unmistakable. Unknown genius creates functional molecular response device from scrap, must see. It was his video, not the humiliation at school, the real one. The footage he had taken hours ago of his makeshift molecule mimicry prototype, uploaded without fanfare. He'd forgotten he even pressed submit. Already there were comments trickling in. This can't be real, can it? I'm a chemist. This is legitimate. Who is this kid? Reminds me of early Breck experiments in the 80s. Elijah's heart raced. His hands hovered over the keyboard, unsure if he should respond. But before he could, a loud knock shook his door. Elijah. Miss Lottie's voice was sharp, urgent. He opened the door to find her standing there in her slippers and robe, holding a cream-colored envelope with a red school seal. They sent someone to the porch, she said, frowning. Didn't even ring the bell right, just dropped it like garbage. He opened it. Notice of suspension. Student Elijah Carter. The words struck him harder than he expected. Consistent defiance, lack of discipline, disengaged behavior, failure to adhere to school policies. Each phrase hit like a verdict in slow motion. Miss Lottie took the paper, read it aloud, and then slammed it on the kitchen table. Disengaged? That boy built a laboratory out of broken junk. What more engagement do they want? Elijah didn't speak. He was staring at the phrase at the bottom. Effective immediately. Duration 10 school days. He knew what this meant. 10 days in Crestwood was a death sentence to any momentum. 10 days to push him further behind while his classmates moved on, fueled by a system that didn't even want him in the race. The next morning, Miss Lottie marched into Crestwood's administrative office like a storm with heels. Her eyes burned with a quiet fury. She asked to speak with Principal Donovan. She asked for clarity. She asked why a suspension, not counseling, not a conference, not even a phone call home. The receptionist's answer was mechanical. We're following district protocol. But protocol didn't stop y'all from parading him down the hallway like a criminal. Lottie snapped. Protocol didn't stop that principal from humiliating my grandson in front of 20 other students. And now this? Principal Donovan eventually emerged, his expression unreadable, flanked by the vice principal and the district compliance officer. He spoke with controlled calm. Miss Carter, we take behavioral disruption seriously. Elijah has demonstrated repeated disengagement and non-responsiveness in multiple classrooms. Disengagement? She barked. He built a living model of ionic behavior last night. What has your science department built this week? They didn't answer. Lottie leaned in. You all know what this is. You can dress it up with policy codes and citations, but it's the same old noose. You're not suspending him. You're containing him. The room was silent. The compliance officer cleared her throat and muttered, "You have the right to appeal the decision." Miss Lottie took a breath, her voice lowering to a dagger's whisper. "He's already appealing every day he walks into this place." Back home, Elijah was silent. He watched as she scribbled a letter to the school board, calling for an immediate review. But deep down, they both knew what would happen. Nothing. The board would claim they needed more time, the review would be delayed, and even if it wasn't, the outcome was already written in invisible ink traced by skin color. Elijah wandered into his room and sat by the window. The streets outside were alive with the dull hum of lawnmowers, car horns, and kids shouting, but he couldn't hear any of it. His eyes landed on the blinking node from the night before. It still pulsed, steady, unbothered, alive. He opened the science forum again. The video had been shared 92 times. One comment stuck out this time. "This reminds me of an experiment Dr. Breck referenced in an old MIT paper. Does anyone know the boy's name?" The world, the real world, was asking for him. But his school, it was silencing him. That night, while Crestwood tucked away his name behind bureaucratic terms like non-compliant, the internet whispered it louder. Elijah Carter. Miss Lottie sat across from him with a plate of leftover biscuits and a fire in her eyes. "You know what this is, right?" He nodded. "Yeah." "They're scared." "Of what?" She smiled, sad but proud. "Of what happens when you stop hiding your light." Outside, the wind blew hard. The trees bent but didn't break. Elijah opened his laptop again, hands trembling with a clarity he hadn't known before. He uploaded the model video to a second platform, one that reached deeper corners of the science world. Then he typed something simple beneath it.
"This was built in a room where the school says I'm not learning. I'll let the world decide."
He hit upload. Within hours, it began to spread. One repost came from an obscure academic blog in New Mexico. Then another from a junior physics student at Cornell. A tweet from a black STEM group went viral, praising a young genius being pushed out by the same system that should be lifting him up. And then just before midnight, an email arrived. Subject: Elijah Carter, urgent inquiry. From the office of Dr. Samuel Breck. Miss Lottie reads the email first, and her eyes fill with tears as she whispers, "Elijah, this name, your father used to talk about him like he was a god." The email arrived without flourish, no attachments, no formal signature, just a name in the subject line, and a few lines of text. Elijah Carter, urgent inquiry.
"I saw the video. This boy has the kind of mind they write about decades later. Please tell me he's the son of Thomas Carter."
Miss Lottie didn't sleep that night. She sat in the glow of the kitchen lamp, reading and rereading the message. The name at the bottom, Dr. Samuel Breck, held a weight she hadn't felt in years. She remembered him faintly from her younger days, a lanky, intense man with careful eyes and a voice like a jazz piano, soft, unpredictable, thoughtful. He and Thomas had been inseparable in their 20s, one cleaning laboratories to survive, the other breaking into academic spaces that weren't built for men like him. Thomas used to call him the professor, even before the world did. She replied with shaking fingers. "Yes, Elijah is Thomas's son. He's here, and he's everything his father hoped he'd be." 3 days later, a black car pulled into their cracked driveway. It was late afternoon, the kind of humid Georgia heat that made the walls sweat. Elijah was still fiddling with his circuit when the knock came. Miss Lottie answered, and the breath caught in her throat. Samuel Breck hadn't aged like most men. His face was carved by time, yes, but his eyes were bright, focused. He wore a wool vest, despite the heat, a canvas messenger bag slung across one shoulder. In his hand he held an old copy of Scientific American, bookmarked and weathered. He looked like he'd stepped out of a different era, or maybe he never really left it. "Sam," she whispered. He nodded gently. "Lottie." Then his gaze shifted and landed on Elijah, who stood just behind the doorframe, quiet, observing. "Thomas had your eyes," Breck said, offering a soft smile. Elijah blinked. He didn't know what to say. "I'm told you made something the rest of us have been trying to replicate for years," Breck said, walking inside as if the walls themselves welcomed him. "Do you know what you built?" Elijah nodded slowly. "It wasn't perfect, but I think it mimicked ionic behavior. The node responded to temperature and humidity like a molecular cluster might under pressure." Breck didn't blink. "You didn't think, you knew, and that distinction changes everything." The two sat across from each other at the kitchen table, as Miss Lottie served coffee, the air still heavy with disbelief. Breck pulled out a faded notepad and flipped to a page filled with equations and hand-drawn schematics. "This," he said, pointing to a spiral pattern in the margin. was the closest I ever got. And I had a lab, funding, equipment. You had a broken blender and a light diode. Elijah looked up. So I wasn't wrong? Breck smiled. Son, you're a decade ahead of most first-year engineering students. Something in Elijah shifted. Not pride, not even relief, just confirmation. That all those lonely hours, those whispers of doubt, the faces that dismissed him, they'd been wrong. His thoughts had weight. From that moment, Breck visited every evening. He never came with a schedule, just questions, thought experiments, brain puzzles. He never taught Elijah what to think, only how to dismantle, rebuild, and challenge everything he assumed was true. They worked in Elijah's bedroom, the air thick with solder fumes and burning ambition. Breck would slide books across the desk, obscure texts, out-of-print journals, notebooks with curled edges and notes in red pen. Elijah consumed them like scripture. Miss Lottie watched from the hallway, arms crossed, eyes misting. She hadn't seen her grandson this alive in months, maybe ever, but they kept it secret. Breck insisted, "Let the world think you're sleeping. It's safer that way." He explained how academia had chewed him up, how he'd nearly made tenure twice and both times mysteriously lost departmental support, how his patents were delayed, his credit minimized, his voice diluted until silence was the only safe response. "You're a black boy with fire in your veins," he told Elijah one night. "If they see the flame too early, they'll call it arson." So Elijah studied in the shadows. He began building models more sophisticated than his tools should allow, a vibration-based switch that responded to changes in air pressure, a prototype for a low-energy water purifier using broken capacitors. One night he simulated carbon decay patterns using little more than graph paper and kitchen foil. And Breck watched, his heart swelling with both joy and fear. "This is what your father wanted for you," he whispered once, barely audible over the static hum of an old fan. "He was smarter than me, you know. But he didn't have time. The world clipped him too fast." They never talked much about Thomas. It was too raw, too fragile, but when they did, Elijah listened like a man rebuilding something sacred. Then came the night. Breck sat at the desk alone, thumbing through Elijah's notebook while the boy grabbed a soda from the kitchen. On one page, Elijah had drawn a theoretical design, a compact energy cell that used temperature fluctuations to generate electricity without combustion. It was a wild idea, unrealistic, brilliant. Breck stared at it for a long time. Later that night, back in his apartment, he scanned the design and emailed it to an old contact, a woman who owed him more than a few favors. Subject: young mind. No noise, just brilliance. Body: he doesn't know I'm sending this, please read it, then decide what the world deserves to know. He hesitated, then hit send. Back on Monroe Street, Elijah sat in bed, staring at the ceiling. "Do you think I could ever be that kind of scientist?" he asked. Miss Lottie peeked in, her voice a gentle hum. "You already are. The rest of the world just hasn't caught up yet." In a research lab 3 states away, Dr. Elena Voss opens her inbox, scans Elijah's design, and immediately picks up her phone. In a pristine lab perched on the top floor of the Alderstein Institute for Advanced Science in Connecticut, the early morning light streamed through glass walls, casting long shadows across tables filled with molecular models and calibration tools. Inside, Dr. Elena Voss sipped her black coffee, her white lab coat crisp, her expression unreadable as her eyes remained glued to the laptop in front of her. The video was only 2 minutes long, but it felt like a rupture in time. She watched it 3 times. No sound, just visuals. A young black boy in a cluttered room filled with salvaged metal and mismatched wires, calmly demonstrating a device that pulsed with environmental feedback, responding to his breath, to heat, to pressure. No voiceover, just deliberate movements. A flicker of brilliance in his hands, a rhythm that no random tinkering could replicate. Elena Voss had spent 20 years chasing anomalies. She had worked under Nobel winners, then became one herself. She had seen staged footage, overhyped claims, academic fraud, and sleek packaging. But this was different. It wasn't polished. It was raw, improvised, and heartbreakingly elegant. She opened the email again, reading Dr. Samuel Breck's short note for the 5th time. "He doesn't know I'm sending this. Please read it, then decide what the world deserves to know." Breck. That name rang like a relic of another generation, one of the first black chemists ever published in Energy Synth Quarterly, a genius sidelined by tenure boards who loved his work but hated his skin. Voss had read him as a student. She remembered the elegance of his equations and the silence that followed his rise. She didn't hesitate. Voss picked up her office phone and dialed the number listed in the email. Crestwood Middle School, Atlanta. The phone rang twice. Principal Donovan answered, his voice as polished as his image. Principal Donovan speaking. Elena's tone was steady, unmistakably authoritative. Yes, this is Dr. Elena Voss, Nobel laureate in chemistry. I'm calling to confirm. Is this where a student named Elijah Carter is currently enrolled? There was a pause on the line, short but sharp. Donovan blinked, caught between disbelief and confusion. Yes, that's correct. She heard the hesitation in his voice. It confirmed everything Breck hadn't needed to write. I've come across a scientific demonstration attributed to him, she continued. It's exceptionally advanced. I'd like to connect with the student and possibly speak with his guardian. Can you confirm his enrollment? Donovan's throat tightened. His eyes flicked to the door, then to the faculty list on his desk. His voice stiffened, trying to reclaim ground. Elijah Carter has had some difficulties. He's not a high-performing student by our academic metrics. Voss didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her silence said more. Difficulties, she repeated. I see. And what interventions were taken to support his education? Donovan hesitated. He's been disruptive, distant, recently suspended, actually. There it was, the weaponized phrase. Voss pressed her lips together. Do you have his contact information on file? We can't release personal information without district approval, Donovan said quickly, the walls going up. Then consider this a formal inquiry from the Alderstein Institute. I will be following up. She hung up without another word. In her office, she sat back, eyes narrowing. Suspended, she murmured. Of course. Down in Atlanta, Donovan stared at the silent receiver in his hand. His palms were damp. A Nobel scientist just called his office, not the district, not the superintendent, him, and not with a complaint, but curiosity. For a student he had just filed paperwork against. He buzzed the intercom. Send me Elijah Carter's file. His assistant entered minutes later, holding the red folder. He flipped it open, eyes scanning the pages with new urgency. It was filled with generic notes, unfocused, frequent daydreaming, non-compliant, pages he had signed without thought, notes written with the confidence of someone who assumed no one would ever ask about this boy. But now, someone had, and she wasn't just anyone. He picked up the phone again, not to call Voss back, but to cover himself. Ms. Rowan, contact the district. I need an emergency review of Elijah Carter's status, and bring him to my office, immediately. In room 2114, Elijah was quietly sketching a structural design for a new model Breck had challenged him to consider. A fluid energy sink that mimicked nerve synapses. It wasn't perfect, but it kept his mind calm, focused. He barely noticed the knock. Elijah, the assistant said, peeking in. Principal Donovan wants to see you. A few students looked up. He didn't react. He closed his notebook, stood, and followed. The walk down the hall felt different this time. Not just because of the silence, but because he wasn't afraid. The fear that used to creep into his bones whenever his name echoed through a hallway had dulled. Now it was curiosity, resolve. Donovan stood by his office window when Elijah arrived, hands in his pockets, looking like a man rehearsing empathy. Come in, Elijah, he said smoothly. Elijah did. He didn't sit. Donovan cleared his throat. I'm reading from Words Fiwer, received a call this morning, from a Dr. Elena Voss. No flicker in Elijah's expression. She's interested in your work. I assume you're aware of her reputation? Elijah nodded slowly. I've read 2 of her papers. Donovan forced a smile, trying to feign pride. That's impressive, very impressive. Elijah stayed quiet. There was a long pause, the kind that threatened to reveal more than words. Then Donovan stepped closer. I think we may have misunderstood you, Elijah. Perhaps your recent challenges were the result of a learning style mismatch, something that wasn't being properly addressed. Elijah's jaw tensed. He didn't blink. Would you be open to a meeting with Dr. Voss, if we can coordinate it? He didn't speak. Because deep down, he knew this wasn't a reversal. It was containment. Donovan wasn't proud of him. He was scared of the attention. And Elijah could feel it, like the hum of his circuits, like the invisible tension of an electron just before collision. Elijah finally speaks. Does she want to talk to me, or is this just to make you look good? The principal's face freezes, because he doesn't have an answer. Elijah's question echoed in Principal Donovan's office like a dropped stone in a silent lake. Does she want to talk to me, or is this just to make you look good? Donovan blinked. He opened his mouth, but no response came. And in that pause, brief but telling, Elijah understood everything he needed to. A week later, a letter was sent home. this time with a gold-embossed seal and no red warnings. It was an invitation from the Georgia Youth STEM Alliance, requesting Elijah's presence as a junior presenter at their annual innovation showcase. According to the letter, the decision had been influenced by multiple academic submissions and endorsements from respected professionals. The school didn't waste a second claiming ownership. Principal Donovan stood before the staff at their weekly meeting, voice filled with manufactured warmth. "One of our very own will be representing Crestwood on the state STEM stage," he said, as if Elijah had grown from the bricks of the building itself. "This is a proud moment for all of us." Mrs. Patterson clapped a beat too late. Others followed, half-heartedly. Behind the scenes, Elijah was summoned again to the office. This time the tone was polished and perfumed. "We'd like to help you prepare," Donovan said smoothly, handing Elijah a manila envelope. "We've drafted a short script you can use for your presentation. It's been reviewed by the district's media liaison." Elijah took it without speaking. Later, in the quiet of his bedroom, he unfolded the pages. It began with, "Good afternoon. My name is Elijah Carter, and I'm proud to represent Crestwood Middle School, where I discovered my love for science thanks to the encouragement of my teachers and administration." He stopped reading. There was no mention of his bedroom lab, no acknowledgement of his father, no word about Breck, not a line about Miss Lottie. The device itself was reduced to a vague energy-sensing prototype, stripped of its intricacies. It wasn't his story, it was theirs. A coat of fresh paint over the same cracked wall. On the day of the event, Elijah arrived in a pressed shirt and slacks, his curls shaped by Miss Lottie's patient hands and coconut oil. Breck didn't come, but he sent a note tucked in Elijah's pocket. "You're not a guest at their table. You are the architect. Walk like it." The venue was a sprawling auditorium inside the city's performing arts center, polished, towering, and intimidating. Backstage, Elijah was ushered to a prep room with other students. They were mostly white, their clipboards labeled, their parents adjusting ties and fixing posture. Elijah sat alone. A volunteer, clipboard in hand, approached. "You're Elijah Carter?" Her tone was polite but surprised, like he'd shown up in the wrong line. "Yes," he said simply. "You're scheduled right after Preston Wexler. He'll be presenting on his team's eco-sensor drone system. Pretty advanced." She smiled, then added, "You've got your script, right?" "I've got a script," Elijah replied, not looking up. He spent the next hour watching other presenters through a side curtain. Each stepped up, recited lines, clicked through slides, and exited to polite applause. Some stumbled, some dazzled, all followed the script. When it was nearly his turn, Donovan appeared backstage, adjusting his tie. "Elijah," he said, "remember, this is an opportunity. Represent Crestwood well. Just stick to the outline, you'll do great." He gave a practiced smile and a thumbs up, as if they were old friends. Elijah nodded, silent. His name was called. He stepped onto the stage. The lights were blinding, the crowd a blur. Faculty from the district sat in the front row. Voss wasn't there, not yet, but her name was on the event program, as a special guest. The air was tense. Elijah reached the podium and pulled the folded script from his pocket. He held it with both hands. A beat passed. Then another. The crowd waited. He stared at the paper for a full 10 seconds, then slowly looked up, and tore it in half. The sound sliced through the auditorium like a whip crack. Gasps rippled. Donovan shifted in his seat, face hardening. Elijah leaned into the mic. "My name is Elijah Carter," he began, voice steady, "and I'm not here because this school believed in me. I'm here in spite of how it didn't." The silence grew electric. "I was told I was distracted, defiant, not trying hard enough. But while they labeled me, I was building, learning, alone." He gestured to the device beside him, a new prototype. Breck helped him refine, a thermal feedback model that mimicked neurotransmitter signaling. "I didn't build this to impress anyone. I built it because I saw something nobody else did. Because my father once told me I'd become energy, that I'd change form. And I did, not in their classrooms, in my bedroom, with broken parts and buried dreams." The audience was frozen. And today, Elijah continued, "I'm not reading their script, because I'm not their story." Backstage, a woman in a gray blazer, Dr. Elena Voss, watches the speech unfold with tears rising in her eyes. She pulls out her phone and dials, "Get me the admissions chair at MIT, right now." For a second after Elijah's voice stopped vibrating through the microphone, there was no applause. No gasps, no polite murmurs, just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't come from confusion, but from collision. A room full of people collided with truth. Elijah stood at the center of it, motionless. The remnants of the torn district-approved script still clutched in one hand. The other rested gently on the edge of his prototype, a living model that pulsed with quiet energy, mimicking neural patterns through shifting temperatures and voltages. It glowed soft red, then dimmed to blue, like it was breathing. He hadn't spoken long, just under 3 minutes. But it had been enough. Enough to unmask the hypocrisy. Enough to challenge the script they had written not just for this event, but for his life. He stepped back from the microphone, expecting nothing. And then, someone rose. One woman, third row, mid-aisle. She stood slowly, like something inside her had shifted. Then another. And another. A ripple of movement spread across the auditorium, as people began to rise from their seats. Not in unison, but organically, like a wave gaining force. Some clapped hesitantly, others erupted with sudden furious applause. A few had tears in their eyes. Dr. Elena Voss remained seated, her fingers steepled beneath her chin, her expression unreadable, except for the glassy shimmer in her eyes. Donovan sat frozen in the front row, his palms glued to his knees. The script had failed, his control had slipped, and the student he tried to manage had just rewritten the narrative. Live. Backstage, an event assistant fumbled with a headset. Who approved that? Was that cleared? No. Another replied, wide-eyed. He went off script. Should we cut his mic? Too late. The moderator rushed toward the stage, motioning Elijah to step off. But Elijah didn't flinch. He turned to face the audience one last time.
Thank you for listening, he said, soft but sure. I hope you remember more than just the applause.
He walked off the stage, passing the moderator without acknowledgement. Voss stood now, her eyes following his every step. She turned to a staff member beside her and whispered, "Find his guardian. I want to meet them tonight." The media room buzzed. Though the event wasn't being televised, a local online education platform had been streaming it. The clip of Elijah tearing the script and delivering his unfiltered speech was already making rounds on social media. One journalist tweeted, "A 13-year-old black student just rejected an entire system live on stage and brought the house down. His name is Elijah Carter." Hashtags were born within minutes. Elijah unscripted. Voice of the silence. Carter effect. That evening, Elijah sat in the back seat of Miss Lottie's car. Quiet. She was driving with one hand, the other resting gently on her chest. Her phone buzzed nonstop in her purse, but she didn't answer. "What you did," she said, eyes fixed on the road, "was dangerous." "I know. Was it worth it?" He looked out the window. "They saw me, Grandma. Not the version they wanted. Me." She nodded once, then turned up the radio just enough to drown out the silence between them. At home, their porch light flickered. They hadn't gotten around to fixing it. The house looked the same, but something in the air had changed. When they walked inside, a strange car pulled up behind them. Miss Lottie tensed. Elijah paused, gripping the screen door. Out stepped a woman in a gray blazer, her silver hair pulled back, her eyes tired but bright with purpose. "Elijah Carter?" she asked. He nodded. "I'm Dr. Elena Voss." Miss Lottie's eyes widened slightly. "You're her." Voss smiled faintly. "I saw your speech. That was more than science. That was defiance wrapped in brilliance. I'd like to speak with you both, if you'll allow me." They let her in. Inside, Voss didn't sit like an authority figure. She sat like someone paying respect. She asked questions, listened with intent, and took in Elijah's lab with reverence, not pity. "I've seen ideas like this in graduate-level proposals," she said, touching the pulse circuit gently. "But I've never seen it built from household trash." "I didn't have anything else," Elijah said. She looked at him. "Sometimes the best minds are forged in scarcity." Then quietly, she pulled out a form. "This is an invitation, a fully funded summer mentorship at my lab. We normally only consider college students, but we make exceptions for anomalies." Miss Lottie took the form gently, hands trembling. Elijah's eyes flicked between her and Voss. "What about my school?" Voss raised a brow. "They'll follow your lead now, trust me." Outside, the wind picked up again, but this time it felt less like a storm and more like momentum. As Voss left, she turned at the door. "One more thing. You're not just a student anymore, Elijah. You're a story, and stories, when told right, move entire systems." He watched her leave. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he walked to his desk, opened a blank notebook, and wrote on the first page, "Control the narrative, or they will." The next morning, Elijah wakes up to find his name trending nationwide. CNN, NPR, Even a clip playing on a muted TV in a diner. Headlines scream, "Black genius breaks the mold. Who tried to silence him?" The morning after Elijah's speech shattered the silence. The world felt like it had tilted slightly. The sunlight streamed into his room, but it carried a different energy. Not warmth, but exposure. He woke up to the sound of voices. Not in his house, but from the television Miss Lottie had left on in the kitchen. Her coffee steamed beside a half-eaten piece of toast, forgotten. On the muted screen, his face flashed, wide-eyed, confident, standing at a podium with no script in hand. The caption read, "Black prodigy stuns Georgia STEM event, breaks from school's narrative." Elijah froze. His name was in headlines. His voice, his defiance had made it past those auditorium walls. He grabbed his phone. Notifications flooded the screen. Hundreds of messages, reposts, mentions. One tweet had over 120,000 likes. Elijah Carter, 13. Just reminded America what it tries to erase. Black brilliance is real, raw, and ours. For a few hours, it was like standing in sunlight for the first time. People called him brave, visionary, a role model. Then came the shadows. At first, it was subtle. Comments tucked under praise. Sure he built that? Or was it staged?
Looks like a scripted moment. Bet someone coached him.
Another affirmative action, darling. Get real. Then the language got sharper. Little thug with a soldering iron. He'll be in jail before college. Just another loudmouth playing smart. The comment sections on science forums turned toxic. Threads about his design devolved into coded racism masked as critique. Phrases like probable plagiarism and statistical anomaly were thrown like darts. Someone reposted a still from the event with red arrows pointing to his prototype. Look closely. These aren't original components. This is cobbled junk. Wake up. His email inbox flooded with invitations and threats. One read, "You're not special, boy. You just got lucky. Try to show off again, and you'll see what happens to geniuses like you." Another simply said, "We're watching. Stay in your lane." Miss Lottie saw the shift first. She shut off the news, covered the windows, made Elijah keep his phone off at dinner. "This is what they do," she said, voice trembling. "They cheer until your shine blinds them. Then they come swinging." Even Dr. Breck, who rarely showed emotion, clenched his fists when reading the articles. "This is why we were quiet for so long," he muttered. "They love a black voice, until it says something they didn't script." Crestwood, too, adjusted its tone. The school board issued a statement on social media, congratulating Elijah and simultaneously reaffirming their commitment to academic integrity. It was a double-edged compliment. Then came the real blow. Elijah was called into a district review meeting, under the pretense of protocol clarification. Inside the boardroom, they sat in suits and tight smiles. "We've received questions," one administrator began, "regarding the originality of your design. Since the event gained national attention, we've been contacted by several parties questioning the validity of the prototype." Elijah didn't flinch. "You mean they don't think I built it?" "We're not accusing," she said, raising both hands. "We're simply verifying. Due diligence." Another chimed in. "We also noticed the absence of district-approved mentorship in your development process. It appears your guidance came from an external figure. Dr. Breck?" Elijah nodded. There was an awkward silence. Then, the chairperson added, "You understand, Mr. Carter, that when representing the school, we need to ensure everything aligns with educational standards." The same system that failed to support him was now interrogating him. Not out of concern, but because he'd made them look small. Miss Lottie, who sat beside him, leaned forward. "You all had years to see him. He showed you brilliance in the margins. You ignored it. Now the world claps, and suddenly you care about process?" They didn't respond. That night, Elijah sat in his room, staring at the prototype. It hadn't changed. The same lights pulsed, the same wires curled like veins, but the world around it had shifted, turned sharp. He didn't cry, but something inside hardened. He grabbed a marker and wrote one word on his wall, above the desk. Undeniable. The next day, an envelope arrived by courier. Handwritten, no return address. Inside was a letter on MIT letterhead. "Elijah, if the system continues to fail you, then bypass the system. Consider this a formal invitation to shadow my lab this summer at MIT. Housing, travel, and mentorship fully arranged. I don't care how they feel. I care about what you can build. Voss." The letter had no fanfare, but for Elijah, it was everything. As Elijah folds the letter and tucks it in his notebook, his phone buzzes again. A direct message from a major science journal reads, We want your voice, your story. Would you be willing to write the truth, uncensored? The MIT campus shimmered under a hard, clean summer sun. Glass buildings curved like the future itself, nestled between manicured lawns and silent, guarded confidence. Elijah stepped out of the cab with a borrowed duffel bag and a head full of equations, his eyes scanning the landscape like a boy on the edge of something sacred. He adjusted his backpack strap, the one stitched by Miss Lottie from an old church quilt. It looked out of place here, where students rolled glossy suitcases and wore brand-name lab coats with embroidered initials. Elijah moved quietly, absorbing everything: the hush of academia, the metallic echo of clipped heels on tile, the scent of sterilized air that smelled like ambition. Dr. Elena Voss met him in the main atrium of the Fraley Research Building. "Welcome to the belly of the beast," she said, smiling, leading him through a long corridor lined with achievement plaques and etched glass doors. Behind each door, innovation, money, prestige. Behind his eyes, memory, hunger, legacy. She handed him an ID badge, his name printed in full. No title, just Elijah Carter. As if that somehow was enough now. But inside the lab, reality wore a different coat. The space itself was immaculate. Rows of stainless steel counters, machines humming like quiet thunderstorms, students in lab coats whispering over test tubes and spectrometers. Voss introduced him with minimal flair. "This is Elijah. He's observing the process this summer." A few heads turned. Some nodded politely. Others didn't look at him at all. No one asked his age. No one asked what he built. For the first few days, Elijah moved like a ghost. No assigned station, no mentor, no notes given or guidance offered. Tasks passed to others. When he approached a lab assistant to ask about polymeric bonds in a nanofluid test run, she blinked at him and said, "Sorry, you're the janitor, right?" He didn't correct her. He just walked away and wrote down the compound breakdown from memory. Later that evening, as he organized samples while others discussed trial outcomes, he heard someone whisper under their breath, "Must be some kind of PR move." Another said, "Elena's little outreach experiment." The words weren't aimed directly at him, but they hit anyway. They thought he was a charity case, a footnote in someone else's grant proposal, the black anomaly brought in for optics. He didn't argue. He watched. He listened. He wrote everything down. And then, when no one was looking, he started solving things. One day, a third-year chemistry grad student stared blankly at a molecular breakdown model, muttering, "Why the charge imbalance here?" Elijah, barely audible, said, "Because the sodium flow model you used ignores residual energy from adjacent polar groups. Your simulation assumes vacuum." The room froze. The student turned, defensive. "Who told you that?" Elijah looked at the screen. The molecule did. By the end of the week, he had corrected 4 error-laced trials. By the end of the month, he had improved one of the lab's biosensor calibrators, not because he was told to, but because he saw the flaw. Voss watched everything. She never intervened. She never corrected her team. But every night, she sent Elijah an email. Simple, precise. "Don't explain your value. Prove it." One night, while the others left for a rooftop reception, Elijah stayed late to finish reviewing thermoelectric graphs. The janitor, a Haitian man named Claude, walked in and said softly, "You're not like the rest. You move like you're building something they can't even name." Elijah looked up. "I have to, or they'll name it for me." Claude nodded, wiped a counter, and whispered, "Then keep going, young blood." That same night, Voss stood by the window in her office, the Boston skyline glowing behind her. She picked up her phone and called the office of the National Science Committee. "I'd like to nominate a candidate for the Junior Science Laureate Fellowship," she said. There was a pause. "Who?" "Elijah Carter, independent researcher, Georgia." The person on the other line laughed gently. "Isn't that the kid who ripped up a speech on stage?" Voss smiled. "Yes. And he just redesigned one of our failed filtration protocols. Quietly. In 2 days. Does he qualify? He exceeds it." She hung up and opened her email. Drafted the recommendation, attached his lab logs, his independent simulations, his design sketches from Crestwood, now digitized with precision. Before clicking send, she whispered aloud, "Let's see how they handle a mind they can't ignore." The next morning, Elijah arrives at the lab to find a sealed envelope waiting at his station, the same station that had once been off limits. Inside, a letter bearing the presidential science seal. The envelope sat like a sacred object on Elijah's lab station, thick, cream-colored, embossed with a golden crest, the seal of the United States National Science Committee. He stared at it for several seconds before touching it. The lab was quiet, early morning, just before the others arrived. The light coming through the ceiling panels cast a soft glow over the steel counters, giving the moment a strange, dreamlike stillness. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of letterhead paper, the ink dark and bold. Congratulations, Elijah Carter. You have been nominated for the Junior Science Laureate Fellowship, the youngest nominee in the program's history. Final review pending confirmation of educational records and sponsor endorsement. He sat down. Hard. It wasn't just a nomination. It was validation. It was entry into a world that had never made room for kids like him. Kids who built brilliance from spare parts and held genius in silence. The kind of world where minds were respected before they were doubted. But the second he read pending confirmation of educational records, his heart sank. He knew where this was going. He was still enrolled at Crestwood, and they still held his file. 2 days later, in a small paneled room back in Atlanta, Principal Donovan sat across from the district superintendent, file in hand. He wore his usual blue tie, crisp collar, and that same manufactured calm. "I'm not suggesting we stop his nomination," he said, voice oiled and measured. "I'm simply raising a red flag. We need to be honest about his history." Elijah Carter was suspended for defiance. There are behavioral concerns, disciplinary inconsistencies. He slid the red-marked file across the table. The superintendent raised an eyebrow. "You're sure this is worth bringing up?" "Integrity matters," Donovan replied. "We can't let the media paint a false narrative." Across the country, Dr. Elena Voss received an alert. A private email thread had been leaked, one between district administrators discussing Elijah's file. One line caught her eye. "We may need to formally recommend against the fellowship until a thorough review is completed. The school's credibility is also on the line." Voss didn't hesitate. She forwarded the thread to 3 trusted reporters, one of whom had already written a piece on Elijah's speech weeks earlier. Then she picked up the phone and called Dr. Samuel Breck. "You still got that spine?" she asked him. Breck chuckled. "Just dusted it off yesterday. We need to go public. They're trying to erase him before he even gets started." 3 days later, the story hit. Headline: From Suspension to Science Laureate. Why a Georgia School is Trying to Undermine a Black Genius. The article didn't hold back. It quoted the email, named the administrators, published a timeline of Elijah's achievements against the backdrop of institutional neglect. They even embedded the original viral video of the hallway humiliation, resurfacing the wound, but this time framing it as proof. National media ran with it. Opinion writers called it educational sabotage. Civil rights leaders weighed in. One even tweeted, "If Elijah Carter were white, this would be a story of mentorship and miracles. Instead, it's a battle for credibility in a system built to doubt him." At home, Miss Lottie sat beside Elijah on the porch as the news played on a nearby radio. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Elijah kept his eyes on the dirt path beyond the sidewalk. "They're gonna keep coming, aren't they?" he asked. "They always do," she said. "But now, baby, now you've got a louder army." At Crestwood, Principal Donovan's inbox exploded with interview requests and angry emails. The school board launched a damage control campaign, but it was too late. Reporters waited outside the school. Cameras pointed at students as they walked in. Donovan was forced to issue a public statement. "We regret any actions that may have appeared to hinder a student's academic future. Elijah Carter is an exceptional young man, and we wish him the best." No apology. Just strategic wording. But the internet saw through it. Within hours, a new hashtag began trending. "Let Elijah in." Voss, calm as ever, went on NPR. Her voice was soft but stern. "We need to stop mistaking silence for misunderstanding. Elijah Carter was never the problem. The problem was a system that refused to see him until he became impossible to ignore. Then came the moment that changed everything. CNN unearthed an old video, the very one Violet had filmed months ago. Elijah standing in the hallway, head bowed, as Donovan berated him in front of his class. The world saw the moment they tried to break him, and how he walked right through it. That night, as Elijah scrolls through the headlines, a notification pops up. The White House has followed his public profile. A minute later, a message arrives. "Would you be available for a brief call with the president?" The evening was thick with August heat, the kind that clung to skin and made even the breeze feel like breath held too long. Elijah sat in his room, the curtains drawn halfway, the soft blue light of his prototype pulsing in the dark like a quiet heartbeat. He hadn't touched it in days. The headlines had become noise, endless alerts, viral interviews, TV anchors praising his mind with the same polished tones they used to talk about markets and crime statistics. His name had become a symbol, and with that came a strange kind of silence, a quiet too loud to ignore. Then came the notification. He almost didn't notice it, tucked between a sponsorship offer and a news feature request. The account name was simple, White House Gov. For a second he thought it was fake. Until he clicked it. Verified. Followed by top national officials, scientists, journalists. Its bio read, official account of the Executive Office of the President of the United States. And there, beneath the follow. Message: would Elijah be available for a brief private call with the President tomorrow at 10 a.m.? Confidential line to follow. He stared at it, unreadable. Downstairs, Miss Lottie was shelling peas at the kitchen table, the radio low. He walked in, phone in hand. "Grandma," he said, voice steady but thin. "The President wants to talk to me." She didn't flinch. She set the bowl down, wiped her hands slowly, and looked him in the eye. "Then you answer with the same truth that brought you here." The call came the next morning. Not a Zoom, not a press event, just a secure audio line through the Institute's administrative wing. He sat in Voss's private office, the glass wall overlooking the MIT quad, her silent nod of reassurance from the corner. A soft beep, then a voice. Calm, presidential. "Elijah, this is the President. I've read about your journey, and let me be the first to say, you've inspired more people than you'll ever know." Elijah swallowed hard. "Thank you, sir. What you built, what you endured. That's not just science, son. That's legacy. You're proof that when the system looks the other way, brilliance still rises. And I want you to know, you're being watched now. Not by critics, by kids, teachers, whole neighborhoods. They're seeing a piece of themselves in you." Elijah gripped the arm of the chair, his knuckles white. "I'm proud of you," the President said simply. "And I'd like to send something your way. You'll receive it shortly." The call ended. Elena Voss smiled. "He just rewrote the next chapter of your story." An hour later, a government courier arrived. He handed Elijah a sealed envelope, heavier than expected, its seal real, wax-pressed and untouched. Inside, a personal letter. "Dear Elijah. In every generation, there are voices that cut through the noise, not with volume, but with clarity. You are one of those voices. Your courage has lifted more than your own name. It has lifted the dreams of students across this nation who feel unseen, underestimated, or silenced. You have become a light for them, a reminder that genius has no uniform. America sees you now, and we are better for it. Sincerely, the President of the United States." Below the signature was a note handwritten in pen. "P.S. I showed your speech to my daughter. She cried. Thank you for that." Elijah read it twice, 3 times, then just sat there. The silence felt different now, earned, heavy, sacred. Word of the letter spread within hours. It was posted with permission on the official White House social channels, then picked up by every major outlet in the country. Late-night hosts praised him. Celebrities tweeted tributes. A major education nonprofit announced a new scholarship fund in his name, the Elijah Initiative, aimed at supporting gifted students from marginalized communities. And then something unexpected began to happen. Across the country, in classrooms often overlooked, his story became part of the lesson. In a Detroit charter school, a teacher played his speech during morning announcements. In a rural Texas school, a group of black students started a Build Like Elijah club, creating STEM projects from scrap. In Baltimore, a 7th grade girl wrote in her essay, "If he can do it, I can too. Not just survive the system, bend it." Elijah became more than a moment. He became a model. At Crestwood, however, the story landed with heavier hands. The once proud faculty found themselves confronted daily. Students began quoting Elijah's words in class debates. A mural of him appeared outside the old science building, painted anonymously one night, wide-eyed, focused, a halo of circuitry above his head. And then came the request. A district letter, polished, official. "We would be honored to welcome Elijah Carter back to Crestwood Middle School for a student assembly. We believe his story can inspire current students and foster unity moving forward." Miss Lottie read the letter aloud at the kitchen table. Elijah sat across from her, arms folded. "They want to use your light to fix their shadow," she said. "Question is, do you walk back into that building?" He didn't answer at first. He picked up the letter, stared at the header. The school's logo, the same one that had sat at the top of his suspension notice. "I'm not walking back in to make them feel better," Elijah finally said. "If I go for the ones still sitting at the back of the class too scared to speak." She nodded slowly. "Then go loud." Elijah folds the letter, slides it into his backpack, and looks up just as his phone buzzes with a calendar invite. Keynote speaker, Crestwood Auditorium, Friday 10 a.m. The hallway hadn't changed. Same chipped paint along the baseboards. Same buzzing fluorescent lights overhead. The trophy cases lined with dusty plaques, all commemorating achievements no one remembered. But this time, the air held something new: anticipation. Elijah Carter walked through the front doors of Crestwood Middle School like someone stepping through time. He wore no fanfare, no security, just a navy button-down shirt, black slacks, and his father's old watch around his wrist. It didn't tell time anymore, but it kept him grounded. His backpack was slung over one shoulder. Inside was a single note card, blank. The front office staff stood at attention, trying to smile without seeming desperate. The principal's assistant greeted him with practiced warmth. "Mr. Carter, so good to see you again. The auditorium is full. Shall I escort you?" Elijah nodded once. "I'll walk." He turned down the main hallway, the same one where, not so long ago, he had been marched out of room 214 for daydreaming. The same hallway where Principal Donovan's voice once cut through the air like a whip. "This is what happens when you ignore discipline." Now banners lined the walls. "Welcome back, Elijah Carter. Crestwood's pride."
From our hallways to the White House.
He passed them without reacting. Further down, students began to emerge from classrooms, gathering along the hallway in hushed clusters. Whispers turned into murmurs, then claps. A few students applauded softly, unsure. Others cheered. Some simply stared, wide-eyed, as if seeing him was like witnessing a myth step off the page. But Elijah wasn't looking for the fans. His eyes scanned faces, not for admiration, but for the quiet ones. The ones with heads down, the ones who stood behind louder classmates, the ones like he used to be. He saw them. A boy near the lockers, pretending to tie his shoe. A girl biting her pencil, flanked by peers who ignored her. A student with thick glasses, watching him from the back of the group. He saw them all. He walked slower now. At the auditorium doors, Principal Donovan waited. He looked older, or maybe just more exposed. His tie was too tight, his hands folded in front of him like a shield.
"Elijah," he said, voice neutral, "we're honored to have you back."
Elijah nodded but said nothing. Donovan stepped aside to let him in. The auditorium was packed. Teachers, students, press in the back. Cameras rolled, lights dimmed. The stage was set with a single microphone and a wooden stool. The applause began before he even reached the steps. It built slowly, then swelled, the room rising for him. Teachers who once marked him absent clapped like they'd raised him. Administrators smiled too widely. The same walls that had been indifferent to his genius now echoed with applause he hadn't asked for. He stepped onto the stage, nodded once to the crowd, and approached the mic. But he didn't speak. Instead, he turned to the right, looked at the row of chairs near the front of the stage where school officials sat. And then he pointed toward the audience. His voice finally came, calm and clear.
Before I say anything, can I ask something?
The crowd hushed. "I want to sit in the seat where I was pulled out of class, the one by the window." There was a beat of silence. Donovan blinked from the front row. "That seat," Elijah repeated. "Room 2114. The auditorium was still. A teacher, younger than most, stood up and said, "We can make that happen." Elijah stepped down from the stage. The cameras followed. The crowd parted. And slowly, with reporters trailing and students lining the hallway again, Elijah walked back toward room 214. Donovan followed at a distance. When Elijah entered the classroom, it was just as he remembered, only smaller now. The desks seemed shabbier, the walls more faded. He scanned the room and found the seat. Second row. Far left, next to the window. He walked over and sat down. He didn't speak for a long moment, just stared out the glass at the cracked pane, the same one he used to lose himself through. The sky was pale blue, the same shape as it had been on the day he was humiliated in front of his peers. Behind him, the room had filled with students and press. Elijah finally turned back and faced them. "This," he said softly, "is where they told me I was a problem, where they said my silence meant I didn't care, where I was more visible as a threat than as a thinker." A pause. "But this is also where I became something else. Not because of what they taught me, but because I refused to believe their version of who I was." His voice grew firmer. "There are kids sitting in classrooms right now who are told their dreams are distractions, that their curiosity is disrespect, and they believe it until it buries them." He stood up. "I'm here to say, your silence isn't proof you're failing. It might be the start of something brilliant." The room was utterly still. From the hallway, a teacher calls out, "Elijah, there's someone here asking to meet you. Says he was once a student here too, and he brought a prototype." The boy in the hallway had been waiting for Elijah by room 214's door, clutching a small object in both hands. A circular prototype made from what looked like copper coils, cardboard, and a flickering LED core. His face was nervous but lit with admiration. "I built this after watching your interview," he said, voice cracking slightly. "It measures CO2 levels in classrooms. I thought maybe if teachers knew how stale the air was, they'd understand why kids zone out." Elijah smiled, nodding slowly. "That's not just smart, that's empathy in wire form." The boy beamed. Elijah reached out, gently examined the device, and asked a few technical questions, not as a celebrity, but as a fellow builder. It was a brief exchange, no longer than 5 minutes, but it rippled through everyone watching, a moment where power wasn't claimed. It was passed. Later that week, footage of the classroom visit and the young student's invention aired on national news. But something else aired with it, a proposal. Drafted quietly by a coalition of educators, scientists, and civil rights advocates, and backed by Dr. Elena Voss and Samuel Breck, the document was titled the Elijah Carter Educational Equity Act. It included 3 key mandates for all public schools in the country. Mandatory racial bias training for all teaching staff and school administrators, focusing on how assumptions affect discipline, grading, and support. STEM mentorship programs for Black and underrepresented students, prioritizing schools in historically underserved areas. A federal review board empowered to investigate academic bias complaints, with real enforcement power, not just symbolic hearings. The media called it Elijah's Law. What began as a policy proposal soon gained traction. Teachers across districts wrote in. Former students shared stories. A senator from Georgia, herself a Black woman, and former educator, took it to the Senate floor. She delivered her speech with a photo of Elijah's broken-down prototype projected behind her. "This law," she said, "isn't just about a brilliant boy from Atlanta. It's about every child told to be quiet instead of listened to. It's about the Black student suspended instead of supported. It's about rewiring the system." Within 2 months, Elijah's Law passed in the Senate. 3 weeks later, it cleared the House. The president signed it on national television, with Elijah standing quietly behind him, wearing his MIT lab coat, the sleeves a little too long, but his shoulders steady. Miss Lottie watched from home, her fingers pressed to her lips. "They wrote his name into history," she whispered, "and this time, not in pencil." Crestwood installed a bronze plaque near room 21-4. It read, "Here sat Elijah Carter, the boy they misunderstood, the mind they couldn't contain. Let this seat remind us genius blooms quietly." But Elijah didn't linger in the spotlight. He kept building. He spent weekends volunteering at community labs, mentoring younger kids who reminded him of himself. Silent, brilliant, overlooked. He spoke only at schools that had no robotics teams, no laptops, no grants. Those were the places that needed presence, not prestige. Dr. Breck once told him, "Legacy isn't what you do, it's what you make possible for others." And Elijah had taken it to heart. One morning, as he was preparing for a lab trial involving organic battery cells, a package arrived at the MIT office. Inside was a handwritten invitation sealed with a blue ribbon. "The Global Young Innovators Summit, Geneva, Switzerland. You are invited as an honorary keynote speaker and research presenter. We believe your story and science belong on the world stage. Travel and housing fully arranged. P.S. Bring something no one's seen before." He stared at the letter, the sunlight cutting a perfect beam across his workbench. He wasn't surprised, not anymore. But he was humbled. Elena Voss stepped into the room moments later, catching the edge of his reaction. "Geneva?" she asked. He nodded, handing her the card. She smiled. "The world's not just watching anymore, Elijah. They're asking to learn from you." He looked down at his bench, at the blueprint he'd been sketching in silence for days. It was a theoretical device, a model for atmospheric power transfer, energy from air itself, still untested, still unwelcome in traditional theory. He slid the sketch into a folder. "They want something they've never seen," he murmured, "so I'll give it to them." As he packs the blueprint, his phone buzzes with a new message from an unknown number. "We've read your latest theory. The energy sector won't like it, but we're ready to fund it, anonymously. Are you?" The auditorium in Geneva shimmered with soft gold lighting, its glass walls catching the snowy peaks in the distance. Inside, the world's brightest minds sat in rows. Physicists, politicians, technologists, environmentalists, all gathered for the closing ceremony of the Global Young Innovators Summit. At the center stage stood Elijah Carter, Now 18, he was still lean, his eyes still deep with thought, but there was gravity in the way he stood. His voice had settled into something calm and commanding, the kind of voice that didn't reach for attention but demanded it anyway. He looked out at the audience, not as someone overwhelmed by their presence, but as someone finally seen on equal terms. "This moment," he began, "isn't mine alone. It belongs to everyone who was told their imagination was a disruption, their silence, a flaw." A subtle hush fell over the crowd. Elijah glanced down at the lectern, where a small photo of his father sat, tucked between his note cards, Thomas Carter in his janitor's uniform, gripping a physics textbook like it was made of glass and prophecy. "My father died carrying brilliance that no one asked to see," Elijah said, "but I carry it now, not just in his name, but in the names of the millions like him." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out another folded photo, this one weathered, taped at the corners. Miss Lottie sitting on their porch, her eyes squinting from sun and wisdom. "My grandmother believed in me before the world did. She once told me that being black and brilliant wasn't enough, that I had to be undeniable, that I had to become the future, not wait for it." He paused. "So I built one." The audience, silent and still, held its collective breath. Elijah continued. "They told me I was too quiet, too distant, too distracted. But what they didn't know was that I was imagining energy beyond wires, power beyond walls, possibility beyond permission." He tapped the edge of the podium, activating the display behind him. The screen flickered to a diagram, sleek, complex, revolutionary. Atmospheric Conductivity Harvesting System V1.0. Breath-powered energy. A hushed gasp rippled through the room. "This prototype," Elijah said, "pulls ambient kinetic and ionic energy from the air. No combustion, no turbines, no sun required. Just atmosphere, motion, breath, life. And yes, it works. But it's not for sale. Not to the highest bidder. Not to those who treat genius like a patent race." He leaned forward slightly. "It belongs to the people who still dream with nothing but their thoughts." Somewhere in the crowd, Dr. Elena Voss wiped away a tear. Beside her, Dr. Samuel Breck nodded, proud and quietly awed. Elijah concluded, "I was once yelled at for daydreaming in class, but dreaming is a form of engineering. It's design before blueprint, vision before voltage. I didn't learn that in a textbook. I learned it in silence." Thunderous applause erupted. A standing ovation. Cameras flashed, but Elijah didn't smile for the cameras. He looked past them, into something deeper. Later that evening, he stood alone outside the venue, the wind sharp against his coat. Snowflakes drifted lightly around him. He held the folded blueprint in one hand and stared at the night sky. A security guard approached. "That was a hell of a speech, son. The world's looking at you now." Elijah nodded. "I know. Must feel good." He took a breath. "They still don't see me. Not fully." The guard looked confused. "But they stood for you. You saw that." Elijah turned to him. "They applauded what I represent, but they don't yet understand what it took to get here. Not really." The guard shrugged. "Maybe not, but they're listening now." Elijah nodded again, slowly. In the distance, lights blinked from the Swiss skyline, as if the city itself was breathing in and out. He reached into his coat, pulled out a new blueprint. Thicker, heavier, wrapped in a black folder. It was different from the others. Inside were notes scribbled in pencil, diagrams beyond anything he had ever shared. Not a machine, not a product. A system. A world redesigned. The folder bore a single title, etched by hand. Project Lighthouse. Energy for every child. No signature, just that name. As Elijah prepares to mail the folder to a secret lab in Nairobi, a new hub for open source innovation, he receives a secure text. "The oil lobby knows. You've been flagged. Be careful who you trust next." If Elijah's journey moved you, if it reminded you of someone who's been overlooked, silenced, or underestimated, then don't let this be the end of the conversation. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that uncover truth, challenge injustice, and celebrate brilliance where the world least expects it. Because somewhere out there, another Elijah is watching. Let's make sure they know they're not alone.